Welcome to the Graceful Empty Nester. I'm Kim Damon, your host and founder of Worthy Moms at Midlife Discoveries. I help moms create an empowered relationship with their adult children so that they can feel connected and included. The Graceful Empty Nester Conference is packed full of expert speakers that are here to teach you strategies to reconnect with your children, heal your relationships, inspire a future of connectivity and inclusion, thriving as an empty nester. Enjoy this amazing episode. I'd like to welcome Denise Gorant to the Graceful Empty Nesters Conference. Denise is the host of the podcast, Bite Your Tongue, along with her friend Ellen, co-host, where they interview experts in parenting and building relationships. So welcome, Denise.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. It's such an honor to speak to so many people about this wonderful topic, and I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to dive into some questions, and I'm really curious about how you got started with this podcast, Bite Your Tongue, building a healthy relationship with your adult children. How did it all come about? Can you tell us more about it?
Sure. All my life, I've wanted to have a talk show. I love to talk to people. I love to hear stories. My husband used to tease me, daytime with Denise, but I never had the guts. I just never thought I had a television presence. And I was a really early adopter of podcasts. I've been listening for years and years and years. And I always thought, this is something I could do. And I went through many variations of different kinds of topics and different things. And I've done 35 years in public relations and marketing, and I've always been telling everyone else's stories. So the pandemic came around and I had some extra time on my hand. And as I think all of us are that are going to be speaking at your conference, we like to do too much. And if you're not busy enough, you find something else. So I thought, this is time to learn to do a podcast. But what was it going to be about? And I had many ideas. But as I talked to so many friends my age, and I'm in my mid-60s, the topic that came up more and more was our adult children. What is our role in their life? When you think about it, we raise them from 0 to 18. But the longest relationship we really have with them is when they're adults. And it seems for some reason now more than ever, there's a lot of conflict between adult parents and their kids. And I started reading, there literally was a book by Joshua Coleman on kids who divorced their parents. And I thought, oh my gosh, is this real? So I started doing some research into it, and everyone said, oh, Denise, you should do this. You should do this. So finally I said, I'm doing it. And I called Ellen and I said, would you do this with me? I needed support. I didn't think I could really do this on my own. And she said, sure, she'd be glad to do it if I did all the work. So basically I do all the work and she comes in as a co-host when she can. She lives in Boston and Prague, so the time difference can be difficult. And then I did talk to my adult kids because, in some of the episodes I talk about them. And I'm telling you, they were right on board. They were like, this is so great, Mom, do it, do it, do it. And then came, what do you name it? And one night, in the middle of the night, we do our best thinking when we're sleeping, right? And I thought, I always heard through my whole life, what's the sign of a good mother? The bite marks on her tongue. And I'm a talker. And I know the less I say, the better it is. So I thought, this is perfect. Bite your tongue, building healthy relationships with your adult children. And then I just did a lot of research on YouTube and this and that. And really, within about 2 weeks, I launched my first episode. And my sister, Connie Gorant Fisher, she was a photographer, never knew anything about editing, and she learned. Now, I have to say at the time, I was working with an editor in North Carolina on another project for a video thing I was working on. And he helped us with the first 3 episodes to really teach Connie the ins and outs. And one time we had the sound really go bad, and we just had to send the whole thing to him and say, fix it. But after episode 3, Connie has done it all. And I would have to say to anyone who's thinking about starting a podcast, your editor and audio engineer is critical. They make it magical. They can change what you say, how you sound. The whole thing sounds better when Connie's done. So it has been a journey. And I want to tell you, it's been the most fun I've had in my work career.
Oh, I love that. Your story is so much like mine because I, really spoke to and felt a connection to moms with adults. And I really wanted to help other moms that were like me who went through this rough patch. And I had to go to my kids and I had to, talk to them about it. And because our relationship had shifted, they were all on board. And when I saw your podcast, Bite Your Tongue, it just made me giggle. I mean, it to me, it's near and dear to my heart. So I want you to tell us about some of the topics, the experts that have stood out the most, and the most important advice that you received.
I'm going to say I think this is really hard because when you told me you were going to ask this, I thought we have had over 47 episodes and they have covered the gamut from spirituality. I think we just got out of the holidays. How did it feel when your child decided not to go to church, or the child's not baptizing their child, or you're Jewish and the child's Christian? We did a whole episode on spirituality. We've done weddings from the bride's family's point of view to the groom's family's point of view. We've even done trust in estates because people don't realize when their child turns 18, they really need a medical power of attorney and a business power of attorney, because something happens, you're out of luck. And I don't want to plan for the worst, but plan for the worst. So I'm going to try to pick a few that I've really liked. But I would say overarching everything is accepting your child for who they are. I would say almost every episode at some point we talk about get rid of your fantasies, look at reality. They may not be the president of the United States, the CEO, the prima ballerina. They are who they are, and they're not you. And once you accept that and love them for who they are, the journey becomes a little bit easier. Not easy. There are many more steps, but that's a first overriding thing that I've heard over and over again. The second thing I want to talk about is, I'm going to get to real tactics in a minute, but we talked to a fellow by the name of Nelson, Dr. Nelson, and he was from, there's actually, and you might be interested in knowing this, the Society for the Study of Emerging Adults. It's called SSEA, and he is the president. He's a professor at Brigham Young, and I did get the elephant out of the room immediately. This was not about Mormons or anything like that. He's been a researcher for years and years, and his research actually started in his early professional life with preschoolers. And he said young adults are much like preschoolers. And I said to myself, what are you talking about? Do they make a lot of mistakes? Are they learning to whatever? And he said, no, preschool years set the stage for the rest of your learning years. Your young emerging adult years from 19 to about 30 set the stage for the rest of your life. And he talked about the role the parents can play for that journey, or to help and not enable their children to really have that journey in a good, productive way. He also told us to throw out any of our expectations because times have changed. Back in the day, people were getting married at 21. Things are just very different now. We talk about that in a few other episodes too, but I like starting with Dr. Nelson because of his association with the Society for the Study of Emerging Adults. Okay, now I'm going to get to my favorite episode. Okay, and I can't say favorite because every time I do one, I say, oh, this is my favorite. But there is a doctor by the name of Dr. Susan Heitler, and she's actually used to practice in Denver. And I went to her several times when my kids were young. I just loved her tactics. She doesn't talk to you about what your mother did to you when you were young. She gives you real tools to begin right now to, I think, be a better communicator. Her specialty is not parent-child, it's relationships. And that's what you're building with your adult children. You're no longer really a parent, you're building a relationship. And a couple of things she said was, always remember the customer's always right. And that's your adult child. And I argue with her a lot in this episode, so you're gonna have to listen. What do you mean my kid's always right? Well, let's say they say to you, I really didn't like the way you raised me. You didn't give me the opportunity to do this. You didn't do this, blah, blah, blah. You always start with, I agree, and no buts. Buts negates their point. So you can say, I agree. And you know what? It is really difficult to raise children. I'd love to hear more about what you have to say. So right after I did this episode, I took a vacation with my kids, the whole family, their partners, everyone. We went to Lake Tahoe. The whole time I was agreeing and in different ways. And I want to tell you, it's magical. It puts a pin in it immediately. Mom, we went there last. I don't want to do that. Stop doing that. I agree. It must be so hard to have someone saying that all the time. And what's our next step here? Do you know what I mean? Agree and no buts.
Yeah,
Isn't that wonderful?
I love that. And in fact, I've got this, I've talked about the word and, putting the word and in your vocabulary, but this brings it to a whole new level. I love that.
Yeah,
And
I really loved it.
I want to go back though, and talk a little bit about what you said about those expectations that we have of our kids when they're young. Myself, I call that the manual. And I picture in my head, when I first begun this journey of being an empty nester, like these stacks and stacks of manuals with all these expectations of what was going to happen. I had it all written out. And that's not how it works. I had to throw them all out and really, begin from scratch. And
Well, do you ever talk to people with young kids and you're listening and you think you don't have a clue? I'll mention this now. Susan Engel, she's a Williams college professor, and she wrote an article for the New York Times called "When They're Grown, the Real Pain Begins." And one of the quotes she has from an aunt is, "When they're little, they sit on your lap. When they're big, they sit on your heart." And I recently just interviewed, this episode hasn't even dropped yet. Eric Vance from the New York Times wrote an article on time travel with his adult son, and his son's only 4. And every year he's recording a message to him. I don't want to go into it because the episode's great, but boy, did I challenge him, because his son's 4. He thinks he's got it down. Do you know what I mean? His idea is great, and there are a lot of great things that come from it. But he said he thinks, how did he say this? You get better and better. And I said, you don't. He said, you may get better at parenting a 4-year-old, but you don't get better at parenting a 10-year-old. Every stage is different.
yes.
And I think you learn that. And then when they hit adults, it's a whole new ball game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think that we raise different people throughout their lifetime, right?
We do.
Absolutely. So what expert advice have you used that worked really, really well?
Well, Susan Heitler's for sure, which I told you I used in Lake Tahoe. I don't have well, here's another little one that I really took away from Dr. Carl Pilmer. He wrote a book, he's from Cornell, and he wrote a book on fractured families. I had no idea how much estrangement is happening with young adults and their parents. This ended up like hitting the nerves of so many of my listeners. I got the most response from this episode. And it's not always advice that you put into practice. It's things you understand. And he brought up a psychological term called intergenerational stake. And what that means is the stake in the relationship. So parents of adult children have a much higher stake in the relationship. We've spent our whole lives, a lot of money, emotion, and time raising our children. And boy, all we want is a relationship with them when they're adults, okay? Kids are building their own lives. They may love you, but their stake in the relationship is not as big. Their relationship stake is with their spouse, with their children, with their life. And stepping back and understanding that takes you to another level. Understanding this is not your life. And some people are best friends with their adult kids, and that's great. But who's to say which is better? Maybe you gave them the most wings and they're completely independent and they love you and they call you, but you aren't as ingrained in their lives as you'd like to be because you have a bigger stake. And I love that. I'd never thought about it before. So every episode gives me something to think about.
Yeah. So what part can dads play in building that healthy relationship?
Well, we do have an entire episode on Father's Day. We interviewed a doctor from San Diego, California, And he talked to us a lot about that. He's written a lot of articles on mostly sons and their fathers, but he said men. He said this is very, I'm being very broad in my statement, but many men are not as in touch with their emotions as women are. Mm-hmm. And he said men, will spend their whole lives learning to become a great plumber, learning to become a great surgeon, an accountant, whatever they do, but they don't take the time to learn to be a good parent in terms of getting in touch with their emotions, learning to talk to their children with their heart and not just their minds. And he said, it really can make a difference with the relationships you have with your sons and daughters. And there are lots of ways to do that. And that touched me because I have a husband that's not as in touch with his emotions as he could be. He's very funny. The kids love him, but I talk about the tough stuff. And having a father that can also address the tough stuff and also talk about emotions goes a long way.
That's really interesting to me because a lot of times I see dads who take a step back, and the conflict is between the children and the mom. And part of the reason that, I believe that exists as well is because dads just want to fix it. And so their way of fixing it is to, kind of silence themselves, kind of stay out of it and encourage peace that way.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And they don't think it's such a big deal. She'll figure, it's just not a big, they don't understand the emotional impact of it or whatever it might be. You made me think of something. Another overriding thing all the time is, and I had this experience with my own daughter, your child might call and talk about something terrible that's going on. And mothers tend to jump also to the fix it. Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? My daughter stopped me in my tracks and said, I don't want you to fix it. I want you to listen. Mm. And a couple of people have said that. Can I tell you two funny things first? Mm-hmm. And sure. Then I don't mean to, I really just want to share this. We did an episode on grandparenting. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the podcast Satellite Sisters, but it's been around for probably 40 years before podcasts were podcasts. And I've been listening to them. And one of the sisters is Julie Dolan, and her nemesis is Urban Nana. So I got her as a guest. I was just thrilled. And two things she said, one not so funny, one funny. When you become a grandparent, you are the loving and loyal servant. That is it. No advice, no questions. You are the loving and loyal servant. And the other thing she said was, when you go to see your grandchild for the first time, whether it be at the house, at the hospital, put some lipstick on, put a nice shirt on, and comb your hair, because that picture is going to live forever when you met your grandchild. I thought that was great advice.
That is wonderful. I've got 9 grandkids, and I'm telling you.
Oh my gosh, you have 9 grandkids.
Yes, they are the joy of my life. I mean, they truly are. And I grandparent so much differently than I parent. So I know that's the way it's supposed to work.
Are you the loving and loyal servant?
I believe I am. Yeah. I believe I am.
Yeah.
And I always joked with my kids that they were the reason that I didn't kill them. So
I hope I get children. Neither of them are married yet. One is, we're in the midst of planning a wedding. So that's good news, finally. So we'll see.
So based on your interviews, what do you believe are the top 3 reasons we might struggle with our adult children?
We don't bite our tongues enough. We don't accept them for who they are. And I guess that's also expectations. I would say biting our tongues, expectations. Oh, Jane Isay says, and I know she's on your panel, I love what she said to me. She said, remember, when you speak, you're the megaphone of judgment. You may think you're saying your hair looks nice. Find another way to say whatever it is, because when you're saying it, you're the megaphone of judgment. And I realize, I could say to my daughter, your hair looks nice. And she would say, well, what, didn't you like it yesterday? Or why do you say that? What was wrong with it? If her friend said your hair looks nice, she'd say, really, what do you like about it? So think before we speak. Ruth Desmoff says that too. Her book is called Don't Bite Your Tongue. But
Yes.
it's also really about biting your tongue. And she'll tell
Yeah.
you a little bit about that because it's about thinking before you speak. Think
Yeah.
carefully. Don't say it immediately. Wait and separate. We need to separate.
It's so funny you bring this up because I had a situation come up and I really have given this a lot of thought in the last couple of days about, I call it Captain Obvious, and how sometimes just as human beings, we tend to point out the obvious, like we tend to tell someone going outside, it's snowing outside when they can clearly see it's snowing outside. And to most people, this isn't an irritant. But for our kids, it's really irritating.
It's the
And
megaphone.
yeah. And so really dialing that back and understanding what those triggers are for our kids
Yes.
is so important, and not having any judgment over them. We all have them. And I just love these these little these little lessons that we learn in life, that we need to learn, that turn into some huge gems. And this was just one of them for me, was what I call now Captain Obvious. But
Well, and that's a good way to say it because one of the things that comes in over and over again, and this is the hardest for me, say it once.
mm,
We say, have you sent this in?
mhm.
How many times do you say it before they blow up? And, we did interview someone on failure to launch, and I loved what he said too. He talked a little bit about benign neglect, and he said, do less.
Mhm.
Think of what you're doing. How many kids at 25, 26 are still making their own airplane reservations, or the parents are making their reservations to come home, or setting up
Yes.
their doctor appointment for the dentist when they come home from college? Do less. If you want
Yes.
them to thrive and to not, I guess, fear of failure, what's it called? To take off,
Mhm.
do less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Say less,
Exactly.
do less.
Say less and do less. That's perfect.
Right.
So, what about your 3 strategies for actually building that healthy relationship with your adult children?
3 strategies. I want to say, I think we've sort of covered that. I mean, I think it's, biting your tongue, doing less. One of the things you asked me about that I do want to cover is our own lives. And
Mhm.
we've done a couple episodes on our own lives.
Mhm.
If we have a life, we're less apt to be so over involved in our kids' lives. And I interviewed 2 people on this. There's 2 episodes on this. And the first, her name was Julie Pimsler, and she's a scaling coach. She's the author of a book. I think it's called Go Big. She also started the
Oh.
Pimsler language program, Little Pims for little kids. I just happened to literally run into her in a coffee shop in New York. And she
Mhm.
talked a lot about mindset,
Mhm.
changing your mindset. Women in particular, and I feel badly that I'm talking so much about women, but we don't have confidence, or we think of what might go wrong. And I'm going to give you an example right now today. I was very nervous about this. I don't like being visually on, that something's going to be saved, people can pick it up later. I don't want to do this. I had to really sit and change my mindset. How can I make this work? That sort of thing. And she said, you know what? If you fail, so what? You've
Yeah.
learned.
I love that.
Because
I
all
talk
of
about
us,
that, embracing that failure, with this one sentence that's in my mind all the time, like, that didn't work, what's next?
right, right.
Just embracing that failure.
It sounds easy, but it's one of the hardest things to do. And
Mhm.
she said, if you don't know what your goal is or what you want to do, there's a great book called North Star by Martha Beck. And it helps you kind of identify what you want. What are your really intrinsic values that you want to work towards? You have to have something to do, or you will drive your kids crazy. And another person said, and this was a woman about 40 years old, she had a heart attack. And she wrote a book, My Heart, Myself. And she said, take care of yourself, learn to say no. And they are the exact things that will make you both a better parent and a better person with children at any age. Take
Mm.
care of yourself.
Yes. So there is a link also to your Bite Your Tongue podcast, where you have all these expert interviews and great advice from these 2 amazing hosts, Denise and Ellen. I want to ask you just a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Mhm.
Do you have any other advice to give moms so that they can actually thrive this part of their lives?
I can only, I say this on my podcast, I'm not the advice giver, I'm the receiver. And so I
Mm.
can only share sort of what, I've learned from all of these different interviews. And every day I learn more. And I know I just mentioned Eric Vance, but
Mhm.
he said something, and this episode drops in a few weeks. Um, he records these messages to his 4-year-old. And I interviewed him because I think we all could be doing that. And I think
Mhm.
looking back on your life also enriches your life. And he
Yes.
said, never underestimate what your children or grandchildren will
Mhm.
want to know about you later on. And it's
Mhm.
not lectures, it's not, it's just life. Think
Mhm.
about, my father fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. What would I do right now if I had a recording of him telling me what that was like?
Oh, that's
Think how wonderful that would be. I'm
yes.
going to start this. I don't know if they'll ever be interested, but it might be, cathartic for me. I want to talk about all these struggles I'm having right now. I gave my whole life basically to raising my children. I worked in PR, but my focus, my number one priority was my children. And they have launched, and I need to figure out who I am. And a lot of ways to do that is to tell your story. And I also think for grandchildren, you have, how many did you say you had?
9.
9.
Yeah.
You don't want them to remember you when you're in hospice or when you're the old lady that needs help getting in and out of the car. You want them to remember back to what you're like now, what
Mhm.
joys you're finding with them now. The only way they're going to know that is if you talk to them and tell them. And we have so much technology now that allows you to do that. My memories of my grandparents, I have some of my grandmother bathing me when I was little, but mostly when she got dementia. And
Mm.
what it was like. Who was she when I was 12? Who
Yeah.
were they when I was 9?
Yeah, that
So
is so true. And we don't, I can remember not appreciating um one of my grandparents until much later in life. And then by then it was too late. Like I really feel like I could have connected more to her in our lifestyle. And if I had had that recording, of course,
can you
back then it
imagine?
didn't exist, but
Can you imagine if you had something like that now, how it
oh
would
yeah.
help you? And the
Mhm.
other thing, I guess, is look in the mirror. A couple people, well, one of my recent episodes said this. You're struggling with your kid. You can't understand why he or she is doing this. You're trying everything you can to help them or to give them advice. Stop. Look in the mirror and think about what you're contributing. How are
Mhm.
you making the situation maybe harder for them? Maybe you're enabling them in ways that are not the most positive. Stop and look in the mirror. And I always say, this is my own personal piece of advice, and I'm no doctor. Many times parents think their kids should go to therapy. You go to therapy. If
Yeah.
you're really struggling, go talk to somebody. They will help see what you're doing that might be contributing to it. What are words you're using that might sound more judgmental? It's not going to take 10 years of therapy talking about what your mother did when you were a kid. Just
Mhm.
talk about the ways you would like to be a better communicator to build a healthier relationship with your adult children, and talk to your kids about it. I've sat down and talked to my kids about, tell me when I say it more than once, stop me, because I want them to know I'm in the ball game with them.
Yeah, this is so important because I think that a lot of us get stuck on the fact that when we're struggling like this with our relationships with our kids, that it's our kids that need to change.
Right.
But what I would respond to with that person is it's you that's struggling because normally they're off doing their lives and they're living their lives. It's you that's struggling. You need to fix this.
That's it.
And
Here's
you
the
need,
adult picture.
mm-hmm,
You know,
yeah.
Susan Heitler has a book, I think it's called The Power of Two. And it's not about kids and parents, it's about relationships. I
Mm-hmm,
love that book. And
mm-hmm.
I actually, in fact, I might share this with you if I can find it. There was a modern love story. Do you ever read the New York Times, the modern love stories?
Oh, no, I
And it
haven't.
was about a woman that was training seals at SeaWorld. And she started realizing how the same thing would work with her husband. And it's very interesting. interesting about how giving positive reinforcement, all these different things and I thought, my gosh, that really works. We tend to argue before we respond. We agree and.
Yeah. Use that and word. Quit using
no
that
but.
should word.
Yeah. No buts, no shoulds, and.
No shoulds.
And I work a lot, you can see I talk a little loud, I talk a little fast. I have to slow down when I'm with my kids. I have to, get to, I don't know how to explain it, but not overpower the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Denise. I am so happy that you decided to come on here, even if you felt uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
Being on the other side. Yes. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and make sure that you check out Bite Your Tongue podcast. I think it's great, and have a graceful day, empty nesters.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And if anyone wants to reach out to me to talk more about anything, biteyourtonguepodcast@gmail.com.